I'm Paul Comfort, and this is the 8th anniversary of our Transit Unplugged podcast. Welcome to the world's leading podcast that is focused on top public transportation executives. Great to have you with us. You know, it all started for me over 30 years ago. When I first began my career, I'd always been interested in communications. As a matter of fact, when I was in college, I worked at the campus radio station and was the news director and a DJ. During that time, I also had a part-time job at a local radio station near where I lived, and I ended up working there for 16 years. I was a weekend DJ, sometimes at nights as well. We played middle-of-the-road music, and then I started a show called Comfort's Corner, which was like a local talk show. Sometimes it was done online where I would record an interview, but most of the time it was recorded at a local gas and appliance store in the downtown county seat of the county where I lived, right in the front window, where I would invite people, whether they were a county commissioner or the adjutant general of the Maryland National Guard and all kinds of officials, gubernatorial candidates and congressmen. And it was fun. I loved it. I did that. I also worked early on in communications for local newspapers where I was a columnist and also wrote articles for them. Basically, I'd always try to integrate my love of communications into what I was doing day to day. So I was doing this part-time while I was working as the transportation coordinator for Queen Anne's County, and then on to my next jobs in the private sector. So much so that when I became a county administrator for 2 counties in Maryland, in both counties, I used the Cable Access Fund to open up cable access channels, government channels where you could watch public access shows. When I was at the MTA as CEO, we opened up America's first and only FM radio station operated by a transit system. It was and is WTTZ FM 93.5 with smooth jazz all day long and then 5 times an hour transit and traffic updates. There was a guy named Mark on our staff that had a much better late night FM DJ voice than I did. He was brilliant, man. And then when I got here to Trapeze and now Vauntus, and they asked me, did I want to start a podcast? I was like, sure. And they said, what do you want it to be? I said, I know exactly what I want it to be. I just left being CEO of the MTA in Baltimore, the 11th largest transit system in America. And I wanted to interview CEOs. I wanted to give them a chance in their own voice to talk about what they wanted to talk about. You see, because I knew from experience that most of the time when CEOs get an opportunity to speak publicly or in the media, it's very prescribed. They can only say certain things because usually they're responding to a crisis, whether it's a bus crash or a derailment or some other type of incident, and they've got their, PR person right there with them and they have to stay right on script. I wanted to give them a chance to talk about the things they were excited about, open up about, their lives and careers so that other people could learn possible career paths or talk about the current challenges, maybe, whether it's zero emission buses or autonomous vehicles or cybersecurity, whatever the current challenges they were doing, their big projects, give them a chance just to talk. And so that's what we did. And here we are now, 8 years later, well into our run now with, lots of programs under our belt. We currently, as we had been for the last 8 years, pretty much put out a show every week. It's now on Wednesdays it comes out. We've had over 320 published episodes with hundreds and hundreds of thousands of downloads. We're heard in 100 countries with the majority of our audience in North America, but strong listenership in Canada, the United Kingdom, and in Australia, where I'm headed shortly for a 2-week trip to visit with our Australian partners over there and record podcasts and shows there. Our podcast has been recognized as a top 60 government podcast and was winner of the American Public Transportation Association's Ad Wheel Award for Best Educational Effort, APTA's Ad Wheel. We were very proud of that a few years ago. And we've aired compelling interviews with, nearly 400 transit industry executives, and we continue to do it. And of course, the show has expanded. It first started by doing live events, live CEO roundtables at my own company's conferences, and then at the booths of our companies and other companies at trade shows like the one we just did in APTA that you're going to hear today. We've also moved into television. After the pandemic, I felt like, we wanted to travel. People wanted to see what was going on in the world. So we started our own travel show, Food, Fun, and Culture, at cities around the world from Barcelona to Sacramento and every city in between. We show you the food, fun, and culture, and we show you behind the scenes of their public transportation system like you won't see anywhere else. And we show you how to use that transit system to get around the city, to get to all those fun places I just told you about. And that show is going gangbusters, man. We've won several awards this year. We're now at over 2 million views on YouTube with our shows. I mean, people are watching them. They love this stuff. They love seeing the fun side of public transportation. We love bringing it to them. And for those of you who really want to dig in more, we've also opened up a new show just a couple months ago called Transit Unplugged Behind the Scenes, Transit Unplugged TV Behind the Scenes, where you get the full interviews, you get to see them, which airs the week after the main show drops on the second Thursday of each month. We've also started a News Minute, which is very popular now. It's every Monday. You can get dropped in your email box or in your LinkedIn. A great News Minute by one of America's former top FM DJs herself, Julie Gates, who's on our team. And she brings you kind of the fun side of transit and big news that it's happening. That show has been picked up now by the Transportation Channel, as has our TV show, and also even by places like MSN. We're becoming recognized as a authority, a source for news information regarding the transit industry. Our editor, Trish Hussey, also puts out a weekly newsletter, which you should get. If you don't get it, I encourage you to subscribe to it. It's free, and it tells you everything going on in Transit Unplugged world. And of course, I've been writing books now for 7 years, a book a year, and I'm working on the next one with my book agent for coming out next year on leadership, even beyond the transit industry. But these books also include many of the guests we've had on these shows. That's what Transit Unplugged has become. It's become a whole franchise, and there's lots more new things to come. As you may be aware, we're doing a whole new look for the show, rebranding for the show for 8th season, because 8 is the number of new beginnings. Now, on to this week's episode. It is our live CEO roundtable, recorded and brought to you today here on Transit Unplugged. That's our 8th anniversary show. It includes Andy Lord, who is the CEO of the world's largest transportation network. He is the commissioner for Transport for London. Dottie Watkins, who is the CEO of CapMetro in Austin, who has the nation's largest capital program going on with a $7 billion program approved by the voters. Dwight Ferrell, who heads up Detroit's transit system, the Suburban Mobility Authority for Regional Transportation in the suburbs there. Shawn, Donaghy, my friend from North County Transit District in San Diego, and Adam Leishman, a newer friend who's from Hong Kong, who talks about what it's like to run transit in probably the world's most transit-friendly city, where over 90% of the people ride. Today, you'll also learn about the success of London's Elizabeth line, their upcoming Piccadilly line with Andy Lord. You'll get information on Austin's Project Connect and their unique microtransit services, Detroit's Smarter Mobility Initiative, and the role of leadership, mentorship, and authentic decision-making from all of our guests, from AI technology to the transformative impact of public transport on our cities. This podcast is a perfect summary of what we bring you every week on Transit Unplugged. If you don't follow us, subscribe. I encourage you to do so. You will be, hopefully, like my friend Schneider St. Preux, who was one of the top 40 under 40 public transit leaders in America this year, who was just on the show a couple episodes ago, who told me a year ago and also repeated it on our podcast, Paul, I've listened to every one of your podcast episodes. Wow, huh? What a compliment. And he said, this show, I credit largely with the advancement of my career. I went from a bus driver up the ranks to now general superintendent of the entire bus service for Miami-Dade Transit. And he said he credits what he learned from the guests on the show largely for his advancement in his career. This show is powerful. This show today is likewise. Enjoy. Welcome, everyone, to the Transit Unplugged Live CEO Roundtable here at the Vauntis booth at APTA TRANSform. Great to have you here. Come on over. We're going to spend a few minutes talking to some of the world's leading public transit CEOs here at the Vauntis booth. Thank you for sponsoring us, Vauntis. Let's kick it off with Andy Lord, the Commissioner of Transport for London. Andy, thank you for coming. You made it all the way across the pond. Andy has got so much going on. If you haven't listened to his podcast episode, Transit Unplugged, we kind of break it all down over a half an hour. But tell us about one or two of the big things you've got going on there at TfL.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. So obviously we're now 3 years after the Elizabeth line opened, fastest growing railway in Europe, huge success. So now we're working on upgrading some of the other tube lines. So the big project we're doing on the tube is the upgrade of the Piccadilly line, which is the primary east-west link from Heathrow through the centre of the city and out to the northeast. It's a new fleet of rolling stock built by Siemens, first train arriving in London imminently for testing. It's just under a £3 billion programme of work that will increase capacity on the line by about 12 to 15%. New walk-through first ever air-conditioned trains on the deep tube in London, going to service towards the end of 2025. So that's the major project on the tube. We also have the Watkins Light Railway, our driverless light rail system in the east of the city. We have the new rolling stock for that, also under test, built by CAF in Spain. Again, transformative from the customer experience perspective, but also from a capacity perspective. So two really major programs on the rail side that we're focusing on. And then the other big thing that's occupying my mind is how we convince our new government in the UK to give us some more money so that we can continue to invest and maintain the services that we do. So get a long-term, sustainable capital funding deal for London.
Tell us real quickly about the model there of how you're structured. You're actually a department of the city government. You report to the Mayor of London?
That's correct. We're a public sector organisation, wholly owned subsidiary of the Greater London Assembly. We have an independent board appointed by the Mayor. I'm accountable to the board and the Mayor, who's chair of the board. The Mayor has complete control over TfL in terms of decision-making, and he actually, by legislation, has the ability to set the fares himself.
Wow.
So I run a £9.5 billion cost base. I do what I can to influence his decision-making on the fares, but ultimately the Mayor is the one who sets the fares. So we're very proud of having an affordable system. We have the lowest bus fares in the UK, and we generate the operating surplus so we invest in it going forward. All our meetings are fully scrutinised, held in public, and I have the pleasure of attending various public committee meetings to explain what we're doing and why we're doing it.
I'm sure all the time. We're going to go down the line, but when we come back, I'm going to ask Andy Lord, how in the world do they get everybody to ride transit in London? Because everybody rides, and we need that here in America. On average, across America, only 5% of the people ride public transit on a regular basis. What's your number there? Do you know?
Well, we're 90% ridership compared to pre-pandemic levels, 11 million passengers a day. London has a 9 million population. Not everybody is coming into the office every day, so I want more people to ride.
Yeah.
But the biggest thing we did is we refused to cut services during the pandemic, and which enabled us to have high-frequency turn-up-and-go services. And what we have is a tube system that is designed to connect people from the mainline stations and bring them to the place of work. We have a bus system that is designed to operate in the outer reaches of the city. It's the most affordable element, particularly for people of low income, and it's their primary means of travelling. And we have an ambitious target of 80% of everybody in London either walking, cycling, or using public transport by 2041.
80%. Wow, that's amazing. All right, Dottie. So Dottie started her career as a bus operator. Matter of fact, when I was down there with her, we were riding a bus, and we went out to Barton Springs. And when we got off the bus, she said, oh, by the way, I started driving with him when I started. Quite a story, Dottie.
All right, good afternoon. I'm Dottie Watkins, President and CEO at CapMetro in Austin, Texas. And as Paul mentioned, we've got a lot of fun things going on down in Austin. Most exciting is Project Connect, which is our vision for transit expansion over the next decade or so. But next spring, we'll be launching 2 new BRT lines as a first step in that expansion. We've been very blessed to get small starts grants for 2 new lines to go through the eastern portion of our service area. And we're really excited to start that. Along with that, we're starting a new micro-transit zone. Our micro-transit service that we call Pickup has been very powerful tool in helping us serve neighborhoods and communities that are otherwise really kind of hard to get transit connections to. So we're really excited about that.
Let me ask you a follow-up to that. So in Austin, when Randy was there, you all passed the $7 billion referendum. Has politics changed? Are things changing? Or are you still on course? What's happening?
We're still on course. I wouldn't say politics have changed. We are still in the state of Texas, which is one of Austin's unique challenges and opportunities because we tend to be a much more progressive city than the rest of the state around us. Although all of the cities in Texas are getting more and more progressive. Texas is an enormous place. We are on course. We're actually looking in the next couple of months with our partners to be looking at a draft environmental impact statement for our light rail line, which is the biggest chunk of money in that $7 billion investment. But things are moving forward. We're really excited about how that's going. We still have tons of local support, which is great. I think the pandemic was the we made the difficult decision to go for the vote during the pandemic. We had actually been preparing for a November 2020 election long before we knew that we were going to have a global pandemic. But we knew that the problems of our community weren't going to go away just because we were all sitting at home for some unknown amount of time. And so we went ahead and went for it, and that was great. It would have been great if we'd managed to not have inflation coming out of it and all the other problems that all of us are facing post-pandemic, but we're on track. No pun intended.
That's awesome. On track, yeah. I was just in Austin last week on one of your tracks, and you still have a great service there. It's growing. It's just going to be phenomenal. It's really one of the most exciting agencies in the country for what's happening there. So, Dwight, tell us about some big projects going on there in Detroit and how you're recovering the city.
The biggest project that we have that's going on is smarter mobility. Travel patterns were already changing even before the pandemic. The pandemic just took it to a whole different level. One of the things that we're addressing in Metro Detroit is a lot of you know it's a manufacturing city, or at least it was. And so now trying to make that adjustment to serve manufacturing shifts to now more service jobs coming into the organization, like Amazon and other places like that, then we have to be able to provide more frequent service. The other thing is that we are also taking into consideration the silver tsunami that's coming as it relates to more and more baby boomers who are retiring. And if you've ever had the misfortune to ever have to take your parents' keys like I have, it's awful because that loss of independence. And so we're looking at smarter mobility as a way to be able to provide that kind of service across the region that allows people to maintain their independence. And quite frankly, we have a number of people who are in the millennial and Generation Z generation who don't want a car. And so being able to provide that service to give them those options. We've done some research in that space, and it's not that people couldn't afford a car. They just rather do something else with the money for a car. So there's a lady that works at Smart with us. She and her husband could afford 2 cars, but she says she doesn't want to give up her golf club membership. Okay, all right, well, I can see that. And so that's what we're looking at in terms of the smarter mobility, how we can do it cheaper, how we can have the service actually fit the need, as opposed to, well, why do you have all these empty buses out here? And the other thing we're looking at, too, is moving away from what I call the Southwest Airlines model to the Delta model. And by that, I mean Southwest Airlines has one plane, 737. There may be different lengths, but there's just one plane. Delta has planes of different sizes so they can go to different places. And so that's the other part about we're going to be diversifying our fleet, as well as, making the transition to low emission, zero emission, but also making sure that we have a fleet that better reflects the ridership. So that's something else that we're doing. And so that's it for right now. It's more than enough to say grace over.
There you go. You probably can tell Dwight has a lot of experience. He and I have worked together in this business for over 35 years together in various places. And Detroit is well served by having someone, a seasoned leader like him at the helm. All right, Shawn, what do you got going on there? What's the biggest thing happening?
Yeah, first of all, I want to say how amazing it is to have multi-generational
Your dad.
Here. I'm also third-generation public transit. I'm contractually obligated to give a shout-out to my grandfather, who's in the APTA Hall of Fame, and my dad, who just retired as a transit CEO about 3 years ago in Ohio. So love being up here with, the multi-generational aspect of transit. I think it speaks volumes of the industry. We got a lot of unique things going on, and I'm gonna state the obvious. We've got a lot of capital projects happening in our world, but something that we're also dealing with is workforce development. One of the things that's really an impact, especially in Southern California, is the cost of living. And so when we have conversations with our frontline employees, or even up to the director, manager, or director level, we really have to be thoughtful about where people live. We have a great deal of our workforce that's an hour from our facilities, an hour and a half from our facilities. And that's just for them to be able to have that livability factor. So how are we as an agency really trying to transform our employee experience, what we want that to look like, making sure that our operators have the right shifts so they can take care of their families, not working six and a half days a week. And then on the capital project side, we're a huge county. Like San Diego County, just in terms of square miles, is big enough to be like the 48th largest state in the U.S. And that's a big deal because MTS does an absolutely phenomenal job of the city of San Diego itself and really a lot of East County. And I thought I saw Brian Riley over here. He's our chief operating officer. He's amazing. But we sort of handle the rest, all of North County, 73, 76, 78, the I-5 corridor. Our commuter rail service took a little bit of a hit during the pandemic because we didn't see that commuter service down into San Diego. But what we saw was almost a doubling of ridership on the week. And so we really moved a lot of our service around to sort of manage midday, later in the evening, weekend service. But we sort of, much to what everybody else said, we sort of layered on top of that really our NCTD Plus service, which is our sort of micro transit, and it sort of overlays over our fixed route and some of the other spaces. And I think the idea behind that for us was, are there opportunities, like Dwight said, to change the condition of the type of bus that's in that scenario? And that's a big deal for us. We're providing the same level of service, possibly even a little better. Our planning team is absolutely phenomenal. They do a great job of really sort of imagining what North County could be and what it looks like. So just real happy with their work, and we got a lot of great stuff going on.
That's great. Adam, tell us in Hong Kong, one of the interesting things you may not be aware of, but in Hong Kong, there's no real public subsidy for the bus or the rail. They make their own money. How do you do that, man?
You have a lot of people catching buses.
$1 a head, come on.
Yeah, I mean, we didn't have a subsidy for buses in Hong Kong. Traditionally, we never have. And 90% of the public use public transport for their trips. So 90%.
90%.
Which is, I think it ranks #1 in the world. It's quite amazing. But I think that's only possible when you have a holistic view on how to build and develop your city. And as an Australian, I think a lot of the cities that we have are very similar to the US, where we have a thing called urban sprawl. And it makes it very difficult to run commercial transport operations. Then I had the privilege of living in London for a few years, and it reset my thinking. And I decided not to have a car. I'm one of those people, actually, Dwight. I enjoy living in a city where I don't need to have a car. And I've done that in London and Hong Kong. I haven't had a car for 8 years. But I think we need to rethink how we do cities. I think urban sprawl is our enemy. Cars and roads are our enemy, in a sense, if you want to use colorful language. And we need to get urban planning departments working alongside transport departments. And the transport infrastructure needs to be the backbone of the community. And then we need to build density around those stations. And that's the only way you can make public transport commercial. And I look at a model like in King's Cross, if anyone's been there in London, and Dwight, you're talking about reinvigorating a city. Make public transport the backbone of that. And you look at King's Cross in London, it was like the worst area you could go in London. If you wanted to buy drugs, you went to King's Cross. They put major stations in that go to France, go all across the UK, and the bus stops there, you can get anywhere in London. And now it's like the hottest place to live in London. It's a fantastic case study. And I think we need to be thinking more than just, buses or trains. We need to think about how we make them the backbone of the community and change the perception of what public transport is. What we bring to a city is very unique. If you list me all the problems cities face in the world, where 55% of the world's population live, public transport helps with just about every single one of those.
That's right.
So I think we need to get better at being advocates for taking money out of, let's say, roads and putting it into public transport, transitioning people into public transport, because actually people will choose to live that way if we give them the right opportunity.
Way to go. That's great, Adam. All right, Andy, what do you want to talk about next? Tell us something cool going on in London, man.
Well, pick up on Adam's point. There's been a big debate in the UK. Some of you will be aware of a program called HS2, which is the next high-speed rail link. And the previous government decided to chop off the northern section and also say it wasn't going to come into Euston in London. And the problem is that everybody focused on the journey time benefit of building this super fast railway and how it was going to reduce the journey time between London and Birmingham. Birmingham is the second largest city in the UK. Hugely important, but it was all about how it's going to improve the journey time for people from Birmingham to London, not the other way around. And it wasn't talking about, most importantly, about the economic growth and the wider benefits of how it would free up capacity on the existing rail line, benefit towns and cities and areas there, whilst also creating economic growth and regeneration. So we have spent a huge amount of time in TfL over the last year, 18 months, talking to the government, talking to the supply chain, talking to business stakeholders, exactly to Adam's point around transport infrastructure is the driver of economic growth. It's the driver of jobs, it's the driver of skills and development, and it's a driver for how you certainly grow the country economy more widely. We've been really successful at that. So, for example, we had no idea before the pandemic how many jobs were directly attributable to TfL outside of London. So we did the independent review. We are directly responsible for over 100,000 jobs outside London and the southeast of England. So that's jobs in the north of England, in the north and east, the Midlands, the southwest. That drives economic benefit to those areas. The second thing that we focused on is we are the second largest landowner in London after the Crown Estate, which is the royal family. So how do we maximize that? We have a lot of very old infrastructure, a lot of operational infrastructure that we'd like to upgrade and replace, a lot of very old train sheds that we can rationalize, and then we can reduce the land footprint and then build on it. So we now have our own property company called Places for London. We will be building by the end of this decade 20,000 new homes on our land, up of which will be affordable.
All right, one more round of questions down the line here. Many of you may not know, but Andy got his start in aviation and was at British Airways for 20 years before he came into transit. Talk to us about that transition, Andy, and what did you bring from your aviation experience into public transport?
Well, you better ask my team that, I guess. Look, there's many similarities. Hugely safety critical. Safety is first priority for all of us. Huge people leadership, massive complexity from an engineering and technical perspective, and of course, customer service. They're the key elements. From a BA perspective, I was running their global operation. TfL is now a London operation. So the geography is different, but the decision-making is similar. The timeframes are different. But I think the two big things I would say that one I've brought in and one that we need to learn from aviation, one is we have got to be far more customer-centric in terms of how we operate. We've got to think much more proactively around how we give customers choice, particularly when there's disruption. We've got to be able to communicate more proactively to our customers. We kind of have a disruption and forget about them because they can, unlike aviation, they can find their own way home generally. So we need to be much more putting the customer at the heart of our decision making, which is something we're really focused on in TfL. The second thing that I'm pushing really hard for is we should learn from aviation. They are, they learn from tragic events, but they are incredibly proactive in terms of how they develop new technology. And they are far quicker at putting it into practice and then consistently adopting it across the globe. So if you look at safety in aviation, it is phenomenal. And we need to be much more proactive as an industry, working together, which is one of the reasons why I'm here, to see how we can share and learn from each other. But we all do everything slightly differently. And it adds cost, it adds complexity, and it adds a hell of a lot of time and money to us actually making a difference. And we need to learn from aviation and how they can do that and how we can learn from that.
That's excellent. Dottie, talk to us about what new technologies you see coming in future and how are you going to utilize them? Maybe AI.
Yeah, some of the stuff that we are kind of nibbling around the edges at right now, really just trying to identify the use case and looking for some grants, if anybody from the USDOT is listening, to help us do that. One of them is using AI and just advanced camera analytics. We have a significant number of cameras in our system. We have cameras at many of our BRT stations. We have cameras all over all of our buses. We partner with our local city to be able to view the traffic cameras that we see there. One of the use cases that we think would actually be very beneficial to us, a big piece of what we operate is a commuter rail line. So we operate commuter rail on freight rail tracks. We actually also operate the freight rail. But there are portions of that commuter rail line that go through ranch land. I mean, they go from suburban communities through ranch land to the next suburban community, then into town. And in Austin, we have issues with people who are experiencing homelessness making encampments along the right-of-way. And an encampment along the right-of-way is dangerous for a lot of reasons. The pedestrians on the right-of-way is the biggest one, but also we continue to have significant drought and fire risk. So when you're camping, that's also an issue. And so we're hoping to be able to use the cameras that are already on our vehicles that are going up and down that line all day, every day, to look at what was there the last time a vehicle came through, 30 minutes later, what's there, 30 minutes later, what's there, and tell us when we see the evidence of human activity and we have an encampment encampment, that we need to go talk to the folks and help them find a different place to build their encampment. Currently, we do that with a very labor-intensive process. We send a group of community intervention specialists. We have social workers on staff that we will send out once a month on the weekend, and they'll ride the line in a high rail with one of our rail staff, and they'll go see what they can see, right? And that works, but it's a very labor-intensive process, and we can't always see the things because we don't know, oh, wait, that this has been disturbed. There's actually people over here. And so we're hoping to be able to do more and more things with the many cameras that we have. I think there's a lot that can be done to just be more efficient and effective at what we do.
That's awesome. Thank you. Dwight, I want to ask you a little different question to close up. You've been in executive management in many different jobs in many different cities. And I'd like you, in our podcast, you shared some interesting thoughts for mid-level managers who want to move up, lessons from your career. Give us one or two of the lessons for people who work in public transportation today to help them.
Find a good mentor that can help you and be honest with you. And don't be afraid to fail. If you're afraid to fail, you're already screwed.
You're not going to make a difference if you're afraid to fail, right?
Correct.
You'll be a cheerleader, not a change agent.
My first promotion, I went from bus operator to assistant manager. That hasn't been done before or since then because I was willing to take the risk. And so you've got to be willing to get mentor and be willing to take a risk. I mean, at the end of the day, that's what it is. And so anytime, if you ask any of these people here, the gentleman from London, he went from aviation to transit. That's a risk. So
yeah.
So
I
think if you will,
biggest transit system in the world.
Yeah.
No risk there.
No risk in that at all. But I think that those are the two things, and the mentor who will tell you the truth. And I do have one more thing to add.
Good.
Introspection. The one person that we lie to the most of is ourselves. So you really have to be honest with yourself, because when you look at the failures that you've had in your lifetime, what's the one common denominator? You. Failures, and you learn from them. Be honest about yourself. This is my role in this. It's easy to point the finger and blame your boss for whatever, but what did you do to cause your boss to take the action?
That's good. Shawn, I'm going to ask you to keep that going for just a minute, if you don't mind. I think what a lot of folks don't realize is that when you move into the senior chair, all the easy decisions have already been made before they get to you. The decisions that have a template for them, A plus B equals C. The ones that come to the CEO job are the ones without a template that require judgment that's been forged in the fires of 1,000 decisions that you've made along the way. And like Dwight just said, you've integrated the lessons from them. Oh, that didn't work. I better do something different next time. Give us your thoughts on that. And as a leader, how do you handle that?
Yeah, I would say first, like Andy, I came from aviation also right after 9/11. And I was in a position where I was starting to see a lot of information that came post 9/11. And I said, man, I got to get out of this. Like, this is too much, and sort of work my way into public transit at that point. But I think the one thing that we talk about a little bit as CEOs, we talk a lot about the CEOs Council, is it's one of the most amazing jobs you could ever have. It is also one of the loneliest jobs you can ever have, because it is your responsibility to make sure that every single person under your care knows that you got it. Doesn't mean you're always right. It just means they got to know that you got it. And sometimes that's really taxing. Things are going to come your way. Like when the pandemic hit for us, I was with our board, our deputy CEO, and another individual in Washington, D.C. the day they enacted the Stafford Act and closed the doors to the Capitol. And so we're trying to get our board out of D.C. And I remember the three of us were kind of sitting around at Baltimore Airport, the only place we could get a flight. And we're kind of like, what the heck are we going to do? And I just remember at that point in time, it was up to sort of the three of us to build a plan. And I remember my deputy CEO saying, hey, I really want to help you, but this is your call, boss. You got to figure this out. And I remember kind of never feeling more lonely in my life than thinking, I'm about to make 1,000 wrong decisions over the next 30 days. Because, right, I thought 30, 60 days. Yeah, I was wrong right there. But I think you got to own it. You got to be authentic about what you're doing. You got to let the workforce know that who you are is who you're going to be as a leader. When you need to be strong, you got to be strong. When you need to make the call, you got to make the call. Managing board relationships is interesting too, because you got to make sure that even if you don't agree with what they want, you have to find a way to keep them involved and make sure that their thoughts and opinions are heard. And that's sort of an interesting space that employees don't necessarily see or have to deal with, and then communicate those expectations to your employees. I love being a leader. It's one of my favorite things in the world. But one of these days I'm going back to operations just so I can get back on the street. But yeah, I love it. But you got to make sure you got the people around you that give you good counsel. I've been super fortunate in my career to have some of the best senior staff and director level employees to walk next to me anytime I needed somebody to walk next to me. And I've always been thankful for that. And I wouldn't be here today if it wasn't for those individuals. And like Dwight said, for some of the mentors I had. There's one right over there, Bill Sproul. I could walk through this hall right now and talk to 100 people that impacted my career, if not more. And I'm so thankful for that. And I know each one of us could do the same thing.
Yeah. And Shawn has just been named head of APTA's mid-size bus council. So congratulations on that. Adam, you've operated public transportation, I think, on 4 continents. And you've operated 5 continents. Give us some final thoughts and lessons learned along the way.
I think what was just said previously is really wonderful. And it does get lonely as a CEO. And you do have to take a lot of risks. And your job is literally solving problems nonstop. And in an industry that's quite thankless in many ways, it's like the blood system in the body. Like everyone expects it to work. No one really thanks your blood system for working. But when it stops working, when there's a clot or a problem, there's a major problem. And so often you're dealing with crisis management issues. I guess I've been really blessed in many ways, but also inspired, having experienced London, Singapore, Hong Kong. Like you said before, 3 of arguably the top cities in the world when it comes to buses, and seeing how a public transport system can transform a city. And that really inspired me when I said before I went to London and then the Singapore experience. It really inspired me to dedicate my life to this industry because we can make such a difference. And all of you here are, I assume, in this industry. Thank you. Thank you for being in this industry. It is one of the most important industries in existence. The impact we can have in cities, the impact we can have in transforming lives, improving a lot of the problems we collectively face as a society. I don't think we say that enough. And I think we need to congratulate the people that are doing well in the industry. These guys here doing all a fantastic job, and all of you. And I think we need to bring that spirit of encouragement and working together to really make a transformation. I get really sad when I hear about a major project that's collapsed, like what Andy was talking about before. So much time, energy, resource gone into it, transformational for the country, and often we have so many hurdles to get over, and we make it so hard for ourselves. We need to make it easy and a priority to invest in public transport. So that's the message I leave for you. And thank you for everyone that contributes to our industry.
Thank you. Let's give our panelists a round of applause. And remember, at the heart of what we do is compassion for our passengers. As all of them have said, we make a difference in their lives. When we do it right, things go smooth. We don't often get thanked. When we do it wrong, we can ruin their day or even their life. So let's go out there and give it our A game every day. Thank you, Modaxo and Vauntis, for sponsoring it. Thank you, our panelists.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of Transit Unplugged. Hi, I'm Tris Hussey, editor of the podcast, and I'd like to thank our guests, Andy Lord, Adam Leishman, Dottie Watkins, Dwight Ferrell, and Shawn Donaghy for their time to participate on this CEO panel at APTA TRANSform. And coming up next week, we have something really cool and interesting to share with you. Stephen Tu of LA Metro is responsible for station experience. And you'll learn how Stephen has been able to enhance the safety and cleanliness of the stations and the perception of safety so it increases ridership, gets more people enjoying LA Metro. Transit Unplugged is brought to you by Modaxo. At Modaxo, we're passionate about moving the world's people, and at Transit Unplugged, we're passionate about telling those stories. So until next week, ride safe and ride happy.